Not that long ago, I hopped into Squad 44, the game formerly known as Postscriptum, and I came away from the experience quite hopeful for the future. The studio behind Squad bought this game, which was originally a mod for Squad anyway, and they changed the name and invested resources into new content and updates. And so far, it's gotten a few major updates, and the latest one, Reign of Steel, has just dropped. It's actually a pretty massive update with over a dozen new vehicles, a new game mode, tons of map updates, pages of balance changes, and a lot more. And it's looking very possible that Squad 44 could make a major comeback, but it's not out of the woods just yet. Let's get into it. Now, one could say that Squad 44 is the hell let loose that your mom says we have at home. It's just not quite as polished or well-rounded an experience as one of its top competitors, but it makes up for that with deeper squad mechanics and more tactical gameplay. Postscriptum, for the most part, lost the popularity contest when it was competing with Hell Let Loose when both games were very new. So seeing it revived as Squad 44 and actually seeing it gain in popularity and features is actually quite exciting. And like I said before, this update is massive. It adds a ton of new vehicles for the US, German, and UK factions, along with new anti-tank guns. So no matter what side of the conflict you find yourself on, you should have some new toys to play with. They also added some new vehicle mechanics to spice things up and help armor serve a broader role. Players can climb on top of friendly tanks and ride on their back. There's even new machine guns mounted to some tanks that passengers can operate, and the drivers have also been given smoke launchers for new battlefield tactics. If you found the vehicle variety lacking before, this update very much remedies the situation. I spent a few rounds hanging out with tank crews and even took down a Sherman as the main gunner in one fight. It's absolutely insane how much more intense and brutal these tank battles are compared to a game like Battlefield. The skill ceiling and general mechanics are obviously a bit more nuanced, so it's not nearly as accessible, but if I can figure it out, I'm sure the average player can as well. And seeing a Sherman start to cook off while its main turret is still clinging on for dear life and blasting it away with a final round from the main cannon is just so darn cool. Honestly, I've never been that into vehicle combat in the more tactical or mil-semi style games because usually they're really clunky and they have limited visibility, but when it works in Squad 44, it really works. And this is such a huge change compared to the last time I played, where vehicles kind of felt almost like a non-factor in the general gameplay loop. This time around, it seems like every base has a steady flow of vehicles heading out to the front lines, running alongside tanks, catching rides on passing by logistics trucks. It's like a missing piece of Squad 44's puzzle is finally in place. In hindsight, it actually seems pretty obvious how lacking the game was without the vehicles. Now that said, for an update focused on vehicles, they're still pretty buggy. Pretty much every tank that I saw or was riding in ended up flipping like a dolphin for no apparent reason. It feels like early Arma 3 vehicle physics. And these are the sort of bugs that I'm sure are a lot more complicated to fix than they appear, but they're also so immersion and gameplay breaking that it's super frustrating when it happens. Every single piece of armor that your team has access to is an expensive and important resource, so having it do this, well, just not really acceptable for a game that's supposed to be taken seriously. It's also got some mechanics that feel a little more legacy and inappropriate. You have to climb on top of a tank and then look at the seat that you want to occupy, then hold the enter vehicle key. And the problem is you really can't do this if the vehicle is moving because you'll just fall off or get knocked out of the way, and the prompts are really hard to actually trigger. So while on paper it sounds neat that you have to go over to the appropriate spot on a vehicle to get in the seat that you wanted to get into, in practice it works out terribly. Now, of course, I wasn't in armor the whole time. I spent a lot of my time playing as a medic with a semi-auto or bolt-action rifle, but I also managed to grab the machine gunner loadout and hauled around an MG42 for a while. And if you want to feel like Rambo, I mean, this is the kit for you. I survived multiple ambushes by just spraying and praying in the general direction of gunfire, which feels like that's how the MG42 is supposed to be used. You really do have to bipod to have any chance of controlling these guns, and thankfully when you do, you still have a pretty good range of motion. A lot of games make the mistake of treating a bipod like your gun is welded to the ground and then you have to hit a button to de-bipod just to get a slightly different angle of fire. Squad gives you almost 180 degrees of coverage, which just feels very forgiving, and you're not fighting the bipod. It's a nice change compared to how most games handle it. Now, unfortunately, one of the bigger issues with Squad 44 is its performance and character movement. On many of the maps, my PC could barely manage a steady 60 FPS on what I think are pretty reasonable settings with DLSS enabled. On some maps, I was getting well above 60 FPS, but often the experience would go from very playable 1 minute to just a stuttering mess the next. And I saw a lot of chatter from other players seeming concerned about the FPS as well. It seems like the issue could be more server performance, and maybe I just wasn't having a good server day or something like that, but there's definitely some problems here. The character movement system also compounds just how bad stuttering and the FPS drops feel. Your character often feels like a slow and clunky dude that's never walked up steps before. I kept running into situations where I had to jump just to climb over what felt like a stairwell. Mantling ledges and climbing over terrain is also super clunky. Sometimes I would hop over an obstacle no problem. Other times I'd have to hit the jump button many different times or find a different angle to successfully climb over something that was the same height. And for a title that's technically been out and playable for quite some time, it is disappointing that some of these basics like the performance and optimization and the movement system are still in a pretty janky phase of development. But it does seem like that's going to become a priority in the near future, hopefully. Now, the new game mode is called Frontlines. This is a pretty interesting mode where you start off by having to capture or defend an objective area. If the attackers are successful, multiple secondary objectives, aka missions, will spawn from a random selection of stuff like capturing a point, destroying enemy emplacements, or even building up reinforcements. Between these missions, the defenders have to retreat, giving the attackers more of the map to work with. And honestly, I think this mode plays extremely well, and it could even be the definitive way to play Squad 44 if they wanted to focus on it. It adds so much variety over the other modes. Having focal points like artillery guns to destroy gives both teams more concrete objectives to play around, and it results in better map flow since everyone basically knows where to go at any given moment rather than having a bunch of random objectives scattered around a map and every individual person then has to become their own strategist. This mode is straightforward, but it offers good combat flow and variety while also focusing the combat in a way that an average player shouldn't get confused about where they're supposed to be. It also felt more grounded and realistic than, say, watching some counters on your heads-up display tick up or tick down until the round finishes. Watching flat cannons slowly get destroyed one by one as our team struggled to hold an offensive line against camping MG42 squads really was a fantastic experience. And it felt oddly unique despite it being a relatively straightforward concept. I think Squad 44 just actually executed the concept better than most games. The mode still has some quirks to it. Defenders can easily camp rally points and other attacker spawn locations. Spacing out the missionaries a little bit more would probably fix the problem. The maps in the game are just absolutely massive, but Frontlines barely utilized like a third of the map in my time playing it, so they got more space to work with and tweak the mode. Now, last time I played Squad 44, it felt like a game that had a lot of really good foundational mechanics that was more or less being held back by its indie jank and kind of lack of content to some degree. This time around, it's come much further, but I do still lump it into the camp of being a game with a lot of great potential. It's got some great pacing to it in the new mode. The strategy doesn't feel too cumbersome, and some of these vehicle battles feel incredible compared to, honestly, any of the other vehicle combat games I've played. And for one reason or another, it seems like a lot of Milsim fans are a little disenchanted with Hell Let Loose these days. So Squad 44 being there to give those folks some good alternatives seems like it is working out for them. But the devs really need to shore up the performance issues and get the game running smoothly. Plus, they can still use a good amount of new weapon and map variety. The good news is that the game's updated roadmap has a big overhaul update in the works that'll fix up more maps, add new modes, as well as optimize and polish the game. And after those updates, the devs have a Pacific expansion planned, which sounds like it could be awesome. It'll include Iwo Jima as one of the new maps, which I would imagine they're going to model out fairly realistically, plus the Japanese and United States Marine Corps as new factions. Unfortunately, that update seems like it's a ways off, but the recent progress on the game has got me excited, and I know I'll be here when that new content does drop. Increasing that variety, putting an emphasis on some of their cool new modes, and fixing the bugs and performance could push Squad 44 into a very good and competitive place. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts. Have you been playing Squad 44? What do you think of it? Is there room for another Milsim World War II game right now? Let me know in the comments. And up next, check out this nightmarish dystopian survival shooter that looks absolutely wild. I'm really looking forward to learning more about this game down the road. And as always, guys, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. This is Level Cap, signing off.